New York state of mind is an understatement. Democrats Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are laser focused on winning that primary. And New York, of course, has long been considered Clinton country. She is the state's former senator, after all. But Sanders was born in Brooklyn. And now it's becoming increasingly unclear exactly who has home field advantage. Sanders today stopped by Hot 97, one of the country's biggest hip hop radio stations.
The way he did it last time, you got to come on. It was natural. It was natural. He didn't think twice.
Addressing a crowd of 15,000 in the Bronx, as we see, Sanders continued to hammer Clinton on environmental issues. And that talking point echoed all the way to a Clinton rally in Purchase, New York, with the candidate getting fired up. Watch how she reacted to a Greenpeace activist.
I know the Bernie people.
That activist is claiming she didn't work for the Sanders campaign. But let's talk about this more with Robert Zimmerman. He's a Clinton supporter and fundraiser, and CNN political commentator and former Congressional Black Caucus Executive Director Angela Rye. Thanks to both of you for coming on.
Good to be with you.
Robert, let's start with you, because we see this interaction between Hillary Clinton and this activist. It's a side of her we don't often see. What do you make of it? Is she growing frustrated with these repeated questions about that? What is it?
Can I tell you, as a Clinton supporter, one who's been a strong activist, as a Democratic National Committeeman, I was really very pleased to see her finally take on these lies in this campaign of slander and misinformation that's being led by the Sanders campaign. I mean, obviously, the charge itself is false, and the fact that the Sanders campaign continues to keep it going, I should say, is a much bigger problem. So it's a very genuine exchange. It's real. It's authentic. And it's about time. I'm glad she did it.
But, Angela, I've seen other headlines that say this was an outburst. She's flipping out. She's losing her cool. It made us wonder if a male presidential candidate had this kind of tone, would there be the same reaction?
And I would argue, of course not, right? I think that Hillary Clinton is often charged with sounding shrill, with sounding like she's screaming, even though we know that Bernie Sanders oftentimes his main volume is very, very loud. So we know that that is, of course, not a fair criticism, and it's kind of ridiculous. I think that anyone who continues to be accused of something is likely to, at some point, to respond. I think the one fair point is that Hillary Clinton has received money from several different types of folks who work in several different types of industries. I think the frustration is coming from the fact that I believe there's a Washington Post chart today that shows just how little she has received from employees of the industry. Now, that does not mean that they're giving money on behalf of the companies to persuade her to act in any certain way. It means that these are individuals who happen to work in these companies who like what she's talking about. So I do think that that's vastly different.
Exactly, Angela. We're talking about 0.2% of her entire campaign donations come from individuals who work in these industries. Likewise, Senator Sanders' campaign has received over $50,000, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, from people who work in these industries as well. So I think that the charge itself is baseless. But the more
Sanders, of course, says that a majority of his money, though, is coming from, average, everyday people who donate small amounts of money at a time. We're seeing his momentum grow, Robert. He had 15,000 people turn out to his rally in the Bronx last night. He raised, speaking of money, $44 million in March alone. Should Clinton be concerned?
Well, of course, look, I take nothing away from the Sanders campaign and the energy they've collected and the energy they've created. But let's also remember, as someone who raises money for Secretary Clinton, her donors are also average working Americans, and her donations are coming in strongly, not just online, but through gatherings. But the bigger point is, while I take nothing away from Senator Sanders' crowds and his rallies, Secretary Clinton still has 2.5 million more votes than, in fact, Bernie Sanders has, and is leading in elected delegates. So that, I think, is the bigger focus for Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, not just the rallies and the sound bites, but the actual votes and the delegates who were elected.
But she has lost 6 out of the last 7 races, right, against Bernie Sanders.
Well, that's true. She's lost some, but she's also won not only the bigger states, but more importantly, the states that represent greater diversity. And that's the face of America.
And no doubt about it, she does have more delegates than Bernie Sanders. Angela, we know both campaigns are in talks to schedule a debate in New York, but the Clinton campaign said it all depends on Sanders' tone. I want to show you a tweet sent out this morning saying, "I've been criticized for my big ideas. You know what wasn't too pie in the sky for my opponent? 1.7 trillion to invade Iraq." That tweet coming from Bernie Sanders. Is that the tone the Clinton camp is talking about? Does he indeed need to dial it back, Angela?
Well, I think that here's the reality of this. This race, Pamela, is going to be over soon. Bernie Sanders initially talked about dropping out sometime after June, or not even considering it until June, rather. And now he's saying he's going to take it right up to the convention. I think the reality of it is there's not a huge gulf between these candidates. When Secretary Clinton was in the Senate, she, of course, had a voting record that was 93% the same as Bernie Sanders. And so what I think would be good for the party right now is to stand behind each other on where there is similarities, on where there's parity, on where they see issues the same. I don't think there's anything, just let me finish, Robert, I don't think there's anything wrong with that particular tweet to point out the differences. I just don't see it being as helpful and effective right now. Bernie Sanders has done very, very well with millennials. And of course, Robert just talked about the enthusiasm, him turning out 15,000 folks in New York, and he did the same thing in Seattle last week. I think now is the time to start talking about how we can start supporting each other and moving those folks along to support the best
Final
candidate.
thought.
You know, Angela, to your point, our party may need, the Democratic Party may need some couples counseling when this process is over. But the Republicans are going to need anger management therapy when their process is over.
They need more than that.
I'd much rather be where the Democratic Party is going forward to victory in November than seeing where the Republicans are.
All right, Angela Rye, Robert Zimmerman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And coming up on this Friday, the CIA accidentally leaves explosive material on a school bus after a training exercise. And then get this, elementary school students rode on that explosive-laden bus before the material was discovered. What happened here? That story up next. Plus,